It was 11:45 p.m. when the phone rang in the dim security booth. I stared at the monitor showing nothing but empty hallways and parking lots. The pale green glow almost hypnotic. It had been a dead shift so far, nothing but me, the hum of fluorescent lights, and the occasional scuttle of rats outside. It was just how I liked it. Quiet, predictable. But that phone never rang unless there was trouble. The old rotary dial rattled like a snake in the silence. "Eastside Storage Facility, this is Noah," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. The guy on the other end was breathing heavy, like he'd just run a marathon. "Unit B19, he hissed. "Something's wrong in B19. You need to check it. Right now." Then he hung up. Great. No name. No explanation. Just cryptic panic dumped in my lap. I looked at the logbook. B19 hadn't been rented out in 6 months. It was supposed to be empty. Grabbing my flashlight, I stepped out into the cold night. The air had that eerie bite that only winter brings, sharp and still, like the world was holding its breath. I crossed the yard, my boots crunching over frost-covered gravel, and entered the long corridor where Unit B19 was located. The hallway felt wrong, too quiet. My own footsteps seemed muffled, and the usual flicker of the cheap overhead lights was gone. They burned steady and sickly yellow, bathing the rows of identical steel doors in an unnatural glow. I stopped in front of B19. The padlock was still on it, and the seal was unbroken. My gut told me to turn around, pretend I hadn't heard a thing, but curiosity always wins, doesn't it? Sliding the lock off, I hesitated. What could be so urgent about an empty storage unit? The door screeched open, and I immediately regretted asking that question. What lay beyond wasn't an empty space. Instead, the air felt thick, like stepping into a room filled with invisible cobwebs. My flashlight beam wavered as it cut through the darkness, revealing scattered objects that didn't make sense. A dusty tricycle, a single muddy boot, a pile of Polaroid photos spilled across the floor. I stepped closer, my heart pounding in my chest. The Polaroids were old, their colors washed out, but what they showed made my stomach churn. Faces stared back at me, panicked, wide-eyed faces. Some were screaming, others slack-jawed and still. But it wasn't just the terror frozen on their features. It was the way their skin seemed wrong, stretched too tight or sagging like wax melted under heat. Then I saw one photo near the top of the pile. My blood ran cold. It was me. The photo showed me standing in this very hallway, wearing the same jacket, holding the same flashlight. The timestamp in the corner read 11:57 p.m. It was 11:55. I stumbled back, knocking over the tricycle, which clattered loudly in the silence. My flashlight flickered, then cut out completely, leaving me in total darkness. "No," I whispered, smacking the flashlight against my palm. The beam sputtered back to life for half a second, just long enough to catch a glimpse of the far corner of the unit. Someone, or something, was crouched there, facing the wall. The light died again, plunging me into black. My breath came in short, panicked bursts as I backed toward the door. I couldn't see a thing, but I could hear it. The soft, deliberate scrape of something dragging across the concrete floor. I fumbled for the door handle, my fingers trembling so badly I could barely grip it. Finally, I yanked it open and stumbled out into the hallway, slamming it shut behind me. The lights in the corridor were flickering now, the shadows stretching and warping as if the walls themselves were alive. I ran, not daring to look back, my boots echoing like gunshots against the steel walls. I didn't stop until I was back in the security booth, locking the door behind me. My heart was hammering against my ribs as I collapsed into the chair and stared at the monitors. The camera feed for the B-block hallway was static. All of them were static. Then, one by one, they blinked back to life. And there it was, on the screen labeled B19. The door was wide open. The hallway was empty, but something was wrong with the footage. The edges of the screen shimmered, like heat rising off asphalt, and the static kept creeping back in. I leaned closer, my face inches from the monitor. And then, in the grainy darkness, a shape emerged. Not walking, crawling, It was dragging itself toward the camera, its limbs twisted and jerking, its head lolling unnaturally to one side. As it got closer, I realized it wasn't crawling. It was pulling itself forward with its hands because its legs were gone, leaving a dark, wet trail behind it. The camera feed cut out just as it reached the lens. I don't remember leaving the booth. Don't remember driving home. All I know is that I quit the next morning and never went back. But sometimes late at night when I'm lying in bed, I hear it. The scrape of something dragging itself across the floor. And I wonder, did I really leave it behind? Or did it follow me home? You'd think a week of bad sleep and paranoia would dull the memory, but it only made things worse. Every night since that shift, I'd been waking up at 3 a.m., heart racing, drenched in sweat. And every time, I'd hear faint noises, scraping, dragging, a sound like nails on concrete. At first, I tried to tell myself it was the apartment settling or the old plumbing. But the longer it went on, the harder it was to convince myself. Then the pictures started. They showed up in my mailbox one day, unmarked, wrapped in a plain manila envelope. No return address, no note, just the photos. They were Polaroids, just like the ones in Unit B19. The first one was my building, taken from the sidewalk. The second was my front door. The third was my bedroom window. The last one was me, sleeping. I didn't go back into my apartment that night. I called a friend, Andrew, and stayed on his couch instead. He gave me side-eye when I explained what was going on. But I didn't care. I needed somewhere safe, somewhere that didn't feel watched. For a few days, things were quiet. I started to convince myself I was imagining it, that maybe someone at work had been messing with me, and the photo of me sleeping was just a cruel prank. But the night I decided to go back to my apartment, everything fell apart. It was around midnight when I walked into my place. Nothing seemed out of the ordinary at first, but that feeling of being watched crept back almost instantly. The air felt heavy, like the space itself was pressing down on me. I checked every corner of the apartment. Closets, under the bed, behind the shower curtain. It was empty. Still, I couldn't shake the unease, so I locked every door, every window, and double-checked them all. Then I sat on the couch, trying to distract myself with a movie, but I couldn't focus. Every so often, I'd hear it again. That scraping sound. Faint, like it was coming from far away. Then closer. I muted the TV, holding my breath, straining to listen. The sound was definitely coming from the hallway outside my door. Slow, deliberate, like someone or something was dragging itself closer. It stopped directly outside my apartment. I crept to the peephole, heart pounding so loud I thought it might drown out the noise. First, I saw nothing. Just the dimly lit hallway stretching out in both directions. Then it moved into view. A figure, crouched on all fours, its limbs unnaturally long and bent at wrong angles. Its head was tilted down, obscuring its face with a curtain of greasy, matted hair. It wasn't human. I stumbled back, nearly tripping over the coffee table. The sound of the lock rattling made me freeze in place. It was trying the door. I grabbed my phone, fumbling to dial 911. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely hit the numbers. But before I could call, the rattling stopped. I stared at the door, waiting for something to happen. Minutes passed, and all I could hear was my own ragged breathing. Finally, I worked up the nerve to look through the peephole again. The hallway was empty. I didn't sleep that night. The next morning, I packed a bag, called Andrew, and told him I was staying with him indefinitely. But when I left the apartment and headed down the stairs, I froze. On the landing, just outside my door, was a Polaroid photo. I picked it up, my stomach sinking as I flipped it over. It was me, looking through the peephole. I'm not sure what to do anymore. I've been staying with Andrew for the past week, but the photos keep finding me. They show up in strange places. Tucked into my car's windshield wipers, slipped under the door, even folded into my wallet. The last one I found was different, though. It was a picture of Andrew, sleeping on his couch. And in the background, just behind the couch, I could see it. The thing from B19. I haven't shown Andrew the picture yet. I don't even know how to explain it. All I know is that I can't stay here anymore. Because if it's not after me anymore, then it's after him. I didn't sleep that night. Not because I wasn't tired, God. I was beyond exhausted. But because I couldn't stop staring at Andrew's front door. Every creak of the house, every shuffle of wind outside, my mind twisted it into the sound of something crawling closer. The picture was still in my pocket. I hadn't told Andrew yet. How could I? How do you casually bring up, "Hey, I think the thing haunting me is in your house now"? Andrew didn't seem to notice my tension. He joked about me being paranoid, gave me a beer, and told me to relax. "Nothing's getting past my security system," he said, patting the keypad by the front door. "This place is a fortress." He didn't understand. Locks didn't matter. Not to it. It was around 2:30 a.m. when it started again. I was on the couch trying to stay awake, my phone clutched in one hand and a baseball bat in the other. Andrew was upstairs in his room, snoring faintly through the ceiling. The house was quiet. Too quiet. The kind of quiet that presses against your eardrums, making you hyper-aware of every tiny noise. That's when I heard it. A soft tap-tap-tap against the window behind me. I froze, my grip tightening on the bat. The curtains were drawn, but I didn't need to look to know something was out there. The tapping stopped, and then slowly, deliberately, it moved. Whatever it was began circling the house, tapping on each window as it went. Kitchen, dining room, living room. It was methodical, like it was testing the defenses, making sure I knew it was there. Finally, it stopped at the back door. The knob jiggled once, then twice. My stomach sank as I heard the faintest creak of the deadbolt shifting. It was inside. I bolted off the couch, keeping my footsteps as light as I could. My first thought was to warn Andrew, but I didn't want to shout. If I made noise, I'd give away my position. The house felt like a maze. Every shadow, every corner seemed alive with movement. My pulse was so loud in my ears I could barely hear anything else. I crept toward the stairs, gripping the bat so tight my knuckles ached. Halfway there, I heard it. A low, wet scrape. It was in the kitchen. I glanced down the hallway, and that's when I saw it. Just the edge of its silhouette, peeking out from the doorway. Its head was cocked to one side, its body unnaturally contorted, like it didn't know how to fit into the space it was in. It wasn't moving, just waiting. I backed up slowly, praying the creaky floorboards wouldn't betray me. I made it to the stairs and sprinted up as quietly as I could. "Andrew," I hissed, throwing open his bedroom door. "Wake up," he groaned, rolling over, but didn't fully wake. I yanked the covers off him, panic bubbling in my chest. "Andrew, we have to go. It's in the house." His eyes opened, bleary and annoyed. "What the hell are you talking about?" Before I could explain, we both heard it. The scrape, long, deliberate, and much closer now. Andrew sat up, his face pale. "What the hell is that?" "I told you," I whispered. "It's here." We barricaded ourselves in the bedroom, shoving the dresser in front of the door. Andrew grabbed his phone and started dialing 911, but the call wouldn't go through. "Try again," I urged, my voice trembling. "I am," he snapped, panic creeping into his tone. "It's not connecting." The scrape came again right outside the door. Then the knob rattled. Andrew and I both froze, staring at the door as the rattling grew more frantic. It wasn't banging or slamming. It was deliberate, like it was testing the lock, trying to figure out how to get in. Then it stopped. For a moment, the silence was worse than the noise. And then, slowly, a shadow appeared under the door. It wasn't human. The proportions were all wrong. Too long, too twisted. And then the whispering started. It wasn't in English. It wasn't in any language I'd ever heard. Just a low, guttural murmur, rising and falling like a chant. Andrew looked at me, his face pale and drenched in sweat. "What the hell is that?" he mouthed. I didn't answer. Couldn't. Because whatever it was, it knew we were here. And it wasn't leaving. The whispering stopped, and for a moment, everything was deathly silent. Then came the sound. It wasn't a scrape anymore. It was thumping. Something heavy was slamming against the door. Not violently, like it wanted to break it down, but slowly, methodically, almost like knocking. Thump. Andrew was pale, gripping a lamp he'd yanked off his nightstand like it was a weapon. His hands shook, and his wide eyes darted between me and the door. Do we run? Do we jump out the window? What the hell do we do? He whispered. I opened my mouth to answer, but before I could, the thumping stopped. My stomach dropped as I saw the shadow under the door shift. It wasn't leaving, it was crouching. The gap at the bottom of the door darkened completely, as if it was pressing its face right up against it. Then I heard it sniffing. The sound sent a jolt of pure terror through me. It was wet, labored, like the thing was struggling to breathe. Andrew made a small, involuntary noise, a mix between a gasp and a sob, and the thing stopped sniffing. Then, so slowly I almost missed it, a voice came from the other side of the door. It wasn't human. Noah. The way it said my name made my skin crawl. It stretched out every syllable, like it was savoring the taste. Noah. Let me in. Andrew looked at me, his eyes wide with terror. He mouthed, Why does it know your name? I didn't answer. My throat felt like it had closed up. The thing pressed harder against the door. I could hear the wood creaking under its weight. You brought me here, Noah, it said, its voice low and wet, like something choking on water. You opened the door. You let me out. The realization hit me like a punch to the gut. It wasn't just random. This thing was from Unit B-19. And now it was here because of me. I backed away, shaking my head. I didn't mean to. I stammered. Noah. It whispered again, almost sweetly. You can fix this. Let me in and I'll leave you alone. I promise. Don't listen to it, Andrew hissed. He grabbed my arm, shaking me. Whatever this is, it's lying. Don't you dare open that door. I wasn't planning to, but hearing my name in that voice, it was like a needle burrowing into my brain. It wasn't just speaking to me. It was in me. Suddenly, the thing moved. The shadow under the door disappeared, and we heard it scuttling away down the hallway, fast and frantic. Andrew and I stood frozen, listening. The house fell silent again. Is it gone? Andrew whispered. I didn't answer. I didn't think it was. Then we heard the sound. Not in the hallway this time. It was coming from the ceiling. A soft, rhythmic thudding, moving from one side of the room to the other. Jesus Christ, Andrew muttered, looking up, his eyes fixed on a single crack in the plaster above the bed. And before I could say anything, the crack started to spread. The ceiling was bowing inward, sagging under the weight of something massive. We need to go. Now, I whispered. Andrew didn't need convincing. We shoved the dresser aside and bolted for the door. The hallway was dark, the air heavy and oppressive. My chest felt tight as we sprinted toward the stairs. The house felt alive, the floor creaking and groaning with every step. Behind us, we heard the thing drop down from the ceiling with a wet, bone-crunching thud. I didn't look back. Couldn't. Andrew stumbled, nearly falling, but I grabbed his arm and yanked him forward. We hit the stairs, taking them two at a time. The thing was right behind us now. I could hear it scraping against the walls, its breaths ragged and wet. We reached the front door, fumbling with the locks. My hands were shaking so badly I couldn't get the deadbolt to turn. It's coming, Andrew shouted, his voice cracking with panic. Finally, the lock clicked. I yanked the door open, and we stumbled out into the freezing night air. But we didn't stop. We ran. It wasn't until we were halfway down the block that we finally slowed, gasping for breath. Andrew bent over, hands on his knees, shaking his head. What the hell was that? He panted. I didn't have an answer. My mind was spinning, trying to make sense of what had just happened. But one thing was clear. It wasn't over. Because as we stood there, I looked back at the house. And in the upstairs window, I saw it. A pale face, pressed against the glass, staring down at me. It smiled. And then it raised a hand. It waved. Andrew and I didn't stop running until we were miles away. We ended up at an all-night diner, the kind with sticky counters and a flickering neon open sign. Neither of us spoke for a long time, just sat there staring at our untouched coffee. My hands were still trembling as I wrapped them around the cup, trying to absorb some warmth. Andrew broke the silence first. "What the hell is happening, Noah?" His voice cracked, and he looked at me like I was supposed to have all the answers. "I don't know," I said, my voice hollow. But that wasn't entirely true, was it? I did know. At least I knew where it started. Unit B-19. I explained everything to Andrew, the call, the storage unit, the photos, the thing crawling in the dark. By the time I finished, his face had gone pale, his knuckles white as he gripped his coffee mug. "So what? You let some kind of demon out of a storage unit?" he asked, incredulous. "I don't think it's a demon," I said. "I don't know what it is, but it's not normal. It's like it's tied to me somehow. It's been following me ever since I opened that door." Andrew stared at me, then shook his head. "This is insane. You know that, right? Completely insane." I didn't argue, because it was insane, but it was also real. We decided we couldn't stay at the diner forever, though neither of us had a clue where to go. The sun would be up soon, and the thought of returning to Andrew's house, or worse, my apartment, made my stomach churn. "Maybe we should just leave," Andrew said. "Get in the car and drive. Put as much distance between us and that thing as possible." I wanted to believe that would work, but deep down I knew it wouldn't. "It'll follow me," I said quietly. "It doesn't matter where I go." Andrew frowned, leaning back in the booth. "So what then? We just wait for it to catch up and what? Kill us?" I didn't have an answer, but then I remembered something. The footage. I still had access to the security network from my time working at the storage facility. The system wasn't supposed to be accessible off-site, but let's just say I knew my way around the firewalls. "We need to find out what we're dealing with," I said. "I've got footage of it. More than just what I saw in Unit B-19. If we can figure out what it is, maybe we can figure out how to stop it." Andrew looked at me like I'd lost my mind, but he didn't argue. We ended up at a 24-hour internet cafe, the kind that smelled like burnt coffee and cheap deodorant. I logged into the storage facility's server while Andrew kept watch, his eyes darting to the door every few seconds. It didn't take long to find the files. The system flagged them under a classification I'd never seen before: Tartarus Archive. There were dozens of clips, all labeled with strange codes: B-19-2, Sub-A5, Crabwalker 04. Some of the files dated back years, long before I started working there. I clicked on the first one. The footage was black and white, grainy, but it was enough to make my stomach turn. It showed the same thing I'd seen in Unit B-19, people disappearing into that thing, that creature, and coming back wrong. But it wasn't just confined to the storage unit. The clips showed it everywhere, on subway platforms, in abandoned warehouses, even on busy streets at night. And every time it was the same. People would approach it, drawn in like moths to a flame, and when they came out, they weren't themselves anymore. And then I found something worse. One of the videos wasn't from a security camera. It was handheld, shaky, the frame bouncing wildly as someone ran. They were panting, whispering frantically into the camera. "It's following me," the voice said. "I don't know what it is, but it's everywhere. It's in my dreams. It's in the shadows. It's... oh God." The camera whipped around, and for a split second, I saw it. The same twisted, crawling figure from B-19, lurching toward the person holding the camera. The footage cut out abruptly, but the timestamp told me everything I needed to know. The video was only a week old, and the person holding the camera was wearing the same uniform I used to wear at the storage facility. Andrew was watching over my shoulder, his face as pale as a corpse. "What does this mean?" he whispered. "It means I'm not the first," I said. "This thing, it's been hunting people like me." Andrew swallowed hard, then pointed at the screen. "Wait, go back." I rewound the footage, pausing on the last frame before it cut out. There, in the corner of the shot, was something I hadn't noticed before. A symbol carved into the concrete wall. It was crude, scratched into the surface like someone had done it in a hurry, but it was clear enough to recognize. A circle with an X through it. Andrew leaned in closer, squinting at the screen. "What the hell is that?" "I don't know," I said, but the sight of it sent a chill down my spine, because I'd seen that symbol before. In Unit B-19, Andrew was shaking his head, muttering under his breath as he slumped back into his chair. "A symbol? What are we supposed to do with a damn symbol? Call the Ghostbusters." But I wasn't listening. My mind was racing, piecing together fragments of everything I'd seen and learned. The creature, the footage, the symbol carved into the wall, it was all connected. And it all started in Unit B-19. I stood abruptly, grabbing my jacket. "What are you doing?" Andrew asked, panic rising in his voice. "I'm going back," I said. "Back?" He looked at me like I'd lost my mind. "Back to the storage unit? Have you completely lost it? That thing's going to kill you." "Maybe," I said, slipping my phone into my pocket. "But this thing is tied to me, Andrew. It won't stop until I deal with it. I have to face it." Andrew jumped to his feet, blocking my path. "No, this is suicide. You don't even know what it is, let alone how to stop it." "I don't have a choice," I said quietly. "It's either this or I let it keep hunting me, and anyone else it latches onto. You saw the footage. You saw what it does to people." For a long moment, Andrew just stared at me. Then he sighed and grabbed his car keys. "If you're going, I'm coming with you," he said. The drive to the storage facility was tense and silent. The streets were eerily empty, the streetlights casting long, distorted shadows that seemed to stretch and twist as we passed. When we arrived, the place looked exactly as it had that night. Quiet, lifeless, the rows of steel doors standing like sentinels in the cold moonlight. We parked by the main office and Andrew killed the engine. "Last chance to change your mind," he said, gripping the steering wheel so hard his knuckles turned white. I shook my head. "I have to do this." We grabbed flashlights and crowbars from the trunk and made our way to B block. The hallway felt wrong the moment we stepped inside. The air was heavy, almost suffocating, and the lights overhead buzzed faintly, flickering like they were on their last breath. Unit B-19 was waiting at the end of the corridor, its steel door looming like the mouth of a cave. I hesitated, my hand hovering over the padlock. "Whatever happens," I said, glancing at Andrew, "don't let it leave this room. If we have to destroy the whole unit to stop it, we will." Andrew nodded, his jaw clenched. I slid the padlock off and yanked the door open. The inside of the unit was different. It wasn't just the clutter of strange objects and Polaroids anymore. The walls were covered in markings, dozens of symbols like the one we'd seen in the video, carved deep into the steel. They pulsed faintly, glowing with an unnatural, sickly light. And in the center of the room, the thing was waiting. It was crouched, its twisted limbs splayed out at unnatural angles, its head tilted down so I couldn't see its face. The air around it shimmered, distorting like heat waves. As we stepped inside, it slowly raised its head. Its face was wrong. Too smooth, too pale, like it had been stretched over a skull that didn't quite fit. Its eyes were empty, black pits, but somehow they seemed to see everything. "Noah," it said, its voice slithering into my ears. "You came back. Who are you?" I demanded, my voice shaking. The thing tilted its head, almost playfully. "Who am I?" it repeated. "I am what you let out. What has always been here waiting." "Waiting for what?" Andrew shouted. "For someone like him," it said, pointing one long, bony finger at me. "Someone foolish enough to open the door." I glanced around the room, my eyes landing on the symbols carved into the walls. "These, what do they mean?" The creature laughed, a wet, choking sound. "They're the marks of my prison, a prison you unlocked." I realized then what I had to do. "Andrew, smash the symbols," I shouted. Andrew didn't hesitate. He swung his crowbar at the nearest wall, shattering the glowing symbol with a deafening clang. The creature screamed, a sound so inhuman it made my ears ring. It lunged toward Andrew, its limbs jerking and twisting unnaturally fast. I tackled it, slamming it into the floor. It felt cold, impossibly heavy, like wrestling with a bag of wet cement. "Keep going," I yelled, struggling to hold the thing down. Andrew smashed another symbol, then another. With each one, the creature grew weaker, its movements slower and more erratic. The air in the unit grew colder, the walls vibrating as the last symbols flickered and dimmed. Finally, Andrew destroyed the last one. The creature let out one final, ear-piercing scream before collapsing into a heap. Its body disintegrated, dissolving into black smoke that was sucked into the floor, leaving behind nothing but silence. Andrew and I stood there, breathing hard, staring at the empty space where the creature had been. "Is it gone?" Andrew asked, his voice trembling. "I think so," I said, but even as the words left my mouth, I wasn't sure I believed them. We left the storage facility that night, and I never went back. Andrew moved away a few weeks later, saying he needed a fresh start. I don't blame him. As for me, I'd like to say my life went back to normal. But sometimes, late at night, I see it. The faint outline of a figure in the shadows. Waiting, watching, and I wonder, did we really destroy it? Or did we just let it out? Did you like these stories? Write in the comments. And please write what you didn't like. It will be useful for me to know your opinion. And I will improve my work. Thank you. Subscribe to my channel and click the bell so as not to miss new stories. I try for you.